Hello everybody, my name is Blue and today is another episode of the Grassland Animal Zoo. This episode will be the blue wildebeest, which is the last animal from the Grassland Animal DLC. This doesn't mean it's the last episode though, because there's still a lot of grassland animals in the game, so you could still continue this series with some other animals from the base game or from other DLCs. But because it's the last animal from the DLC, I thought I'll make it something grand. So this episode will be building a savanna enclosure with wildebeest and also Springbok. I was thinking of adding some more animals, but I ended up just adding the wildebeest and Springbok because I thought if I would add even more species, I thought it would be a bit too crowded. But I think these two species together really works well. So this whole enclosure is inspired by Antwerp Zoo in Belgium, but the exhibit I used inspiration for was a Cape buffalo enclosure, where it works well for any savanna animal or any African animal really. And yeah, so it's quite a large enclosure, but the actual enclosure itself is just a grassland, so not a lot of detail in the actual enclosure. Because if you've seen like a lot of these savanna enclosures or like wildebeest or like buffalo enclosures or a lot of these larger herbivores, they're mostly just sand and mud and stuff, not a lot of like trees and plants. But you can still make an enclosure look really good by just using like very little plants. It's hard because I really like to use plants, but it's possible. And here I am using the same rock face I've used for previous builds, but I end up, as you can see, I end up building a new rock face, since I thought it didn't really work for what I wanted. So I just thought I'll just build a new rock face, something that's more fitting. And the rock face will be hiding some buildings in the back, and it will also serve as a shelter for the animals. So there will be some holes in the rock with some gates, basically for a large shelter for the animals. And I tried to use some different colors, but I thought the secondary color was a bit too bright, so I ended up toning it down a bit. So the rock face, the reason why it's there in the real zoo is because it's a city zoo and it hides the outside wall of the actual zoo, the outside perimeter of the zoo. But in this case, it just looks good, so that's why I've used that similar looking design, I suppose. Now that at the back you can see there's this extra like area that I'm now decorating, and it's purely just for decorative purposes. I think in the real zoo it's like an extra area for birds because the whole enclosure is in an aviary. My build won't be an aviary, but I still wanted to incorporate that naturalistic bit at the back just for a backdrop. It's not accessible for the animals, but it looks nice, I suppose. And it adds a bit more detail and a bit more of a something interesting to look at. So the log design that I'm doing right there will be used a bit more around the perimeter of the enclosure as well. I'm adding some more details by using different types of logs, because Planet Zoo has a lot of different logs. A lot of them are from the original African theme, but I also use some log pieces from the North African theme as well, and I think I'm doing that right now. And this preset I will be using to basically build the outside fence. And then for in front, obviously, so you can actually see the animals, I make this lower fence, but I'm keeping the actual mesh fence, so that the animals can't escape, to give you a bit of a sense of security, I suppose. And yeah, it's very I suppose authentic. It's not modern, this part. It's just all logs put together, I suppose, making it a more of an African feeling, I suppose, if that's the correct way of describing it. And yeah, yet again adding some more of these wooden logs, and then also a secondary fence just to separate the guests from the animals just a bit more. Just for extra security, you never know. And then basically that's the front side of the enclosure done. And now for the side, I continue the modern design that I've done previously for the butterfly house, and I just add some extra bits and bobs to make it a bit more interesting. But it's about the roughly the same kind of design, using I think it's from the aquatic pack, I would say. Yeah, I think it's the wooded pieces from the aquatic pack and from the twilight pack, those thinner beams, I think. Yeah. And yeah, I'm adding this extra structure because you can see previously I used these hanging like planters, but I thought I wanted to get something more structurally sound, so I made these frames, and then I end up hanging those planters off of those frames eventually as well. So I end up replacing the original design with this new design, and I think it looks quite good. It works. It's more structurally sound, I suppose, for a large building, and it gives a bit more something nice to look at. So I think the Wildebeest is a really like a good upgrade from when it comes to the actual animal design. You can really see with I think the Wildebeest is the best example. It really shows how Frontier has evolved. Because if you compare the blue Wildebeest with the black Wildebeest, which is from the base game, you can really see how good the blue Wildebeest quality is. I'm not saying the black Wildebeest is bad, because all Frontier animals are top-notch quality, right? But you can see how even with newer packs, Frontier just improves even more. And the blue Wildebeest is so detailed that it basically makes the black Wildebeest look so undetailed, even though it's also a good design. Frontier never ceases to amaze me. It's crazy. There's a lot of critique around. People like to complain basically about the animals in the game, but you have to give the game some, you have to give the developers some credit, because the actual designs are breathtaking every single time. Every DLC they surprise me even more. And I think a lot of the critique that people give to a lot of the animals in the game is very undeserved. And yes, I agree that the lion is a bit outdated, but that's when the developers were more like going for a cartoonish feeling. Later, they kind of realized that the realistic animals work better. But you can definitely see, because the lion is like the marketing animal, they use it for all the posters and stuff. You can tell it's a very stylistic. It's a stylistic approach. It's true. But it's still a good design, I think. And yes, I'm sure they could change it to make it better. But you have to think that it's like, I suppose that's like their kind of Frontier style that they've incorporated when designing the line. But the blue Wildebeest is far from stylistic. It's super realistic, and yeah, definitely something to praise. It's a very good design. But anyway, enough about the Wildebeest. Here I'm doing the actual shelter that I said previously, giving it a more of an interesting shape. I could have just done a box, but you know, I wanted to make it a bit more interesting. It's not really like you see it anyway, because it's hidden behind the rock face. But if from like a bird's eye view, it still looks a bit interesting, right? With some windows, because you don't want the shelter to be in the dark. You want it, that would be a bit sad, I feel like. So no, giving it a bit more light inside. So that's why I added those windows in as well. And yeah, it's an interesting shape because it goes down a bit on the end. But it works out perfectly. I thought it was going to be a bit annoying, but it's not really a big problem to fit the walls and to align it with the roof, basically. But this is probably what annoyed me the most. It's like, you don't really have corners. I mean, you could have used the smaller plasters. I'm sure if you use the smaller plaster pieces, you could get it nicely. Not as sticky out as I have it here. But, you know, you don't really see it, so I didn't really mind as much. But if it was in front, I probably would have spent more time on making the edges nice and clean and not having it all stick out like that. But the backside, I really went over really quickly, so yeah, that's why. And yeah, just adding trim and then eventually adding the wall, and it's the same painted bricks that I've used for the butterfly house, actually. Yeah, and then just filling in the gaps. The backside is just a plain wall, nothing interesting. Same reason as you don't see it really, so why bother decorating it? So it's just a plain base. And I think even in the real zoo it would have looked like that, right? And yeah, here I'm finishing off the edges with the log fences that I've created previously, and yeah, adding some fence, and then oh yeah, now I'm finishing off with the river. This is a river that goes all the way through the, like, around and through the path. To make it a bit more interesting, it's actually inspired by the Antwerp Zoo, as I said previously. And it's quite nice because it adds a little bridge and a bit more of an interesting scenery, and basically just adding a load of rocks and eventually some plants as well to make the river look nice and integrated with the build. And then here is the fence I've been using throughout the zoo, a bamboo fence just as a backdrop to hide the backside of the is it the main wolf enclosure? And then made like a little cul-de-sac, a little dead end at the end. I'll end up adding some tables and chairs there as well with a parasol. But yeah, finishing off a load of rocks, and I think we're nearing the end of the build. I basically just add some trees, and then I end up with adding a little sign at the beginning, basically to welcome you to the final enclosure of the Grassland animal pack. And that's basically this speed build, and we'll hop into a real-time like walkthrough in a bit. But for now, just enjoy the rest of the speed build. Okay, so let's quickly hop into a walkthrough of this enclosure. I added a sign, the Wildebeest passage, to welcome you to the enclosure. It's the final enclosure for a Grassland animal pack animal. It's the last one of the DLC, so I thought I'll go with something more spectacular, a bigger enclosure. This is the biggest one so far in the zoo. And yeah, there's a river that goes all the way through. It's inspired by a enclosure from Antwerp Zoo, actually, in Belgium. It's in the original zoo. It's with the Cape buffaloes, I think. But I used this enclosure for inspiration for the Wildebeest enclosure. And yeah, the Wildebeest are quite nice looking. It's probably one of the more high resolution or like high quality ungulates in the game. I must say the wild water buffalo is quite high quality as well. But yeah, it's definitely up there. You know, the new animals in the new DLCs always keep on getting better, and the blue wildebeest is definitely a good example. Especially if you compare it with the black wildebeest, it's a massive upgrade. So yeah, that's awesome on Frontier's behalf. Also, the river continues to go under here because it goes over, well, under the bridge actually. And then it just ends in a dead end with a little table and chairs and a little parasol. And another view of the blue wildebeest together with the Springbok to make it more of like a savanna feeling. I could add some more species. You can recommend me other species that you think would work for this enclosure, but I thought it would have been a bit too crowded to add more species, but maybe not. I can have a try. But yeah, you can recommend me some other species that may fit with this enclosure. So now let's hop over to this indoor viewing gallery. To enter it, you have to go through the butterfly and reptile house. I actually changed the entrance of the reptile house and put the blue wildebeest here instead. But the reptile house will still be accessible in this building, it will just be elsewhere. And if we enter, it's an empty building mostly, but it's a very good way to view the enclosure, since you get a view of the whole exhibit, which is quite nice. You can see the shelter in the back, and there's a little extra bit over here as well. There's actually a wildebeest over here. And yeah, it's a good view. A big enclosure, and it's the final enclosure. I hope you enjoy the speed build, and if you want me to continue this zoo in particular, there are still some other animals like you know, kangaroos and like all the African animals, you know, dingoes. There's still a couple of grassland animals that could be added to this zoo specifically. So we can continue this zoo if you want me to, and you can just recommend me which animals you would like to see in this zoo, or if you want me to start a new project, a different zoo, you can always recommend me to do that as well. Or some more speculation videos. Basically just recommend me what you would like the next video or the future videos to be, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.